Okay, welcome everyone, and welcome to the panelists, and welcome to those following us on here on Zoom webinar, and also those on social media. We are live on Facebook and a couple other outlets, and I want to first and foremost thank our partners for being part of the symposium put forth by the Portuguese Beyond Borders Institute at California State University, Fresno. This is our first panel discussion. We had the opening ceremonies today at 12 o'clock noon Pacific time, and we had some awesome presentations, and we thank those who participated. And this is our first panel to kick off a week of lots of different activities. 2 to 3 panels every single day between now and Wednesday. And we hope to, at the end, besides me being able to probably drink straight through for 3 days, also have a little bit of a rest and come up with some conclusions that we feel we can strategize for the Portuguese American community with an Azorean flavor, because that's what we are focusing. The symposium is, of course, as you all know, Filaments of the Atlantic Heritage. It's something that happened in Tulare, and only probably Miguel would know about this, but he was a very, very young man. And that happened in Tulare, California between 1990 and 2002. And we were told we couldn't do it because it was a land of agriculture and dairymen, and they don't do music and literature and everything else, but indeed they do. And so this as we restart the symposium, it's called Os Açores e a sua diáspora nos Estados Unidos, the Azores and its diaspora in the United States. And I do like that word diaspora, and we can even talk about that a little bit, because of it is what we are. A diaspora is a creative living. It's not just a community that is abroad living with everything that they brought and doesn't absorb the new stuff. And we'll talk a little bit about that. So I want to thank our partners, of course. First and foremost, PALCUS, the Portuguese American Leadership Council of the United States, who's broadcasting this live also. I want to thank, of course, the Fundação Luso-Americana para o Desenvolvimento, FLAD, and thank our good friend, Director Miguel Avila, who is always following everything in the communities, and he's in our audience today. And thank you, Miguel. Thank you for all you do. Thanks to FLAD. And, of course, Associação dos Imigrantes dos Açores, and Rui Faria is also on the line from the Archipelago of the Azores, from the beautiful island of São Miguel. And of course, I want to thank the Portuguese Tribune here in California, who has been publicizing the event for the last 3 or 4 editions. I don't recall how many, but ever since we put the project together. We have 4 outstanding panelists. We are even 2 from the East Coast, 2 from the West Coast, 2 gentlemen, 2 ladies. I mean, this is no one can talk about this being biased one way or another. The only one that can say we are biased is that they all have a connection to the Azores, but that's what we're discussing here today. So, and I'm going to start with asking each one of our panelists to take about 3 to 5 minutes to introduce themselves. They can do a better job than I can reading their curriculum. So tell me a little bit about yourself, about your background, your connection to the Azores, family connection to the Azores, and what got you involved in the Portuguese American community and that you're involved in. I'll start with Catherine Swash.
Good evening. Thank you so much, Eunice, for the invite to be a part of this panel. My name is Catherine Swash. I am based in New Jersey, in the New York metropolitan area. And my parents immigrated to the United States in the late 1970s. So I am first generation. I grew up not speaking English until I went to kindergarten, basically, and went to Portuguese school and did all the Portuguese things. I danced in a rancho. I'm currently vice chair of PALCUS, the Portuguese American Leadership Council. I'm also vice president of the Portuguese Circle, which is a networking group based in Manhattan, which just basically looks to link people that are either from Portugal to meet other Portuguese people. And I'm glad to be here tonight. So thank you very much for the invite.
Our pleasure. Thank you so much. Thank you, Catherine, and thank you for your great work with PALCUS and everything else that you're involved with. And just a little bit about, so before I turn to another panelist, in New Jersey, of course, the community is a little bit more mainland Portugal, but there is a very strong, the Azores Social Club, is that what it's called? Tell me a little bit about the Azores Club there.
There is one club in New Jersey called Azores Social and Sport Club. It's been around for about almost 50 years at this point, I feel like, between 40 and 50 years. And they have about, maybe 300, 400 members. I have at one point been vice president of the board of directors of that club. They have a soccer team. They have a Res Folclórico, which unfortunately is defunct at this point. But it is the only source in this area of Azoreanness, right? So they do Festa do Santos every year. Obviously with COVID, last year it was canceled, and this year as well. But it was my source of Azoreanness when I was an adolescent and in my early 20s. And my dad wasn't very involved when I was a child, but then he became involved. He was also on the board of directors in various roles, and it was kind of nice. But here we have a very, in the New Jersey area, we have a very big tradition of everybody having clubs from their areas in Portugal. So there's a club that represents Mortaza, there's a club that represents Ribatejo, there's a club that represents Azores, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So it's quite normal that our clubs are Portuguese, but also representative of various regions of Portugal.
Indeed, and that's if you were in Rhode Island, you would be representing San Miguel and Terceira and Graciosa, or Massachusetts and everything else. Yeah, it's more just the islands than the regions of Portugal. But I've always heard the Azores Social Club has done an outstanding job in New Jersey. Kudos to them. So we'll turn to Daniel Dupont, since we talked about Rhode Island and Massachusetts. And Dan, a little bit about yourself for those who may have been living under a rock and don't know who Dan Dupont is. You're on mute. Sorry.
Thank you very much, Denise, and fellow panelists, Denise, for the invitation. And also someone that commented, go Rhody, thank you very much. So my name is Dan Dupont. I was born and bred in Rhode Island, have lived here my whole life. My parents are both immigrants from the Azores, my mother from Santa Maria, my father from San Miguel. I also happened to meet my wife in the Azores on a trip, and was able to drag her across the pond to Rhode Island. We have two children, one of which, Antonio, our oldest son, who's 12, he was actually born in San Miguel. Long story, but nonetheless. But I grew up here. I went to school here, went to the University of Rhode Island. And while I was in my junior year, I decided to run for office and was elected to the Rhode Island Senate, where I served for 20 years. The last 8 or so, I served as the chair of the Senate Finance Committee, where I learned a great deal, and have been, as supportive as I can be during my time in office, and even now as a recovering politician, as I say, and a private citizen and business person, tried to continue to support the community however I can. We have a very vibrant and active community here in Rhode Island, and what strikes me is what Catherine was saying, and I'm sure others are going to say, wherever there are, Portuguese communities, particularly from the Azores, there are, certain clubs or certain organizations with certain characteristics or certain affinities to certain islands or even certain villages or towns. But nonetheless, it's still a very vibrant and active community, but I think one that faces some of the same challenges, which we'll talk about, which everyone else faces as our parents and grandparents' generations age and get more tired. It's up to the future generations to not only keep these traditions alive, but also, I think, reinvent how we do things.
Indeed, and we hope to talk about that until 6 o'clock Pacific time. So we're going to try to keep it to an hour because some of our guests have other commitments after this. And now we're going to back here to California, and we'll go to Monique, Dr. Monique Kelly Valence.
Hi, well, thank you so much for having me here, and it's really nice seeing everyone. So my name is Monique, and I live in Modesto, California. So like Dan, I've lived here pretty much my whole life, except when I was in college. My mother is from Saint George, and she moved to Fayal when she was 9. So we kind of claim both islands. And my family came here in 1969. So we lived with my grandparents growing up. And being Azorean is kind of like part of the essence of who I am, even though I was born in the United States. So when I was 10, I went to the Azores with my grandparents for 3 months, and my mom did not go. So I really had to learn Portuguese. I had no choice. Um, it was definitely throwing me in the deep end of the pool because I didn't want to speak Portuguese before that. It was too hard. But ever since then, I've just had a love of the language and the culture. My mom was always involved in everything. She's kind of a pillar of the community around here, and she has an accounting firm, but we do more than like taxes. We're almost like the Portuguese Social Center here. We help people with their Social Security, their Medicare, and now we've been going into doing procurações and Portuguese citizenships and things like that. So we call the Azores almost on a daily basis, it seems like. And I kind of followed along in my mom's footsteps. So as a kid, I was, just like a lot of little girls involved in the Festa, side maiden queen. And I was actually in the Azores band, so you can't get more Azorean than that. I was also in folklore groups, and I'm still really involved in things like this today. So I'm the Supreme President of the Portuguese Fraternal Society of America, but I still have my Azorean roots. So I'm a director for the Casas dos Swash in Hilmar, and that's kind of like a social, and they have a festa as well, but it's a place where, the men can go and play dominoes and watch soccer, and the ladies can go knit on Wednesday nights, and they have viola lessons and things like that. So it's an amazing place. And we actually do get a lot of support from the Azorean government as well. And then with that, I'm also involved in our Azorean folklore group, the Perlas do Atlântico, and I lead the dancing. And so it's just, I couldn't imagine just not being a part of the Azorean community in particular, even though they're definitely, my dad's from the continent, so I can't say that Azores is the best, but I definitely kind of lean more that way.
You can, he won't mind.
Just don't tell him I said that.
Thank you, Monique. Thank you so much. And last but certainly not least, Miguel Avila. Miguel, tell us a little bit about yourself. Everybody, again, unless you're living under a rock, you know who Miguel Avila is, but please take a little bit of time.
Thanks, Denise. It's a pleasure to be with all of you here tonight. Miguel Avila, I was born in Angra do Heroísmo in Terceira, and came here with the family when I was a teenager. So actually going to high school here in the San Francisco Bay Area, did not connect at all with the Portuguese community during my high school years. And then it wasn't until college, I went to San Jose State University, where I got involved and was one of the co-founders of Club Lusitano, the Portuguese Student Association. By the way, I just want to honor tonight Dr. Heraldo da Silva, who passed away a couple of months ago of COVID. He was definitely an influence on my life and for several generations as the Portuguese professor at San Jose State. Then started a career in healthcare and medical devices, to be more exact. That took me from California to Miami, Florida, and that's actually where my oldest daughter was born. And then my youngest daughter was born back in California. So I have daughters who were born on both extremes of the country. Married to a Portuguese-American woman whose parents are from, again, one of those similar to Monique. My mother-in-law was born in San Miguel, but came very early in life to Terceira, so she identifies more as a Terceirense than a Miguelense. And then my father-in-law is from São Jorge. Both my parents, unlike what social media may say about my dad being from Graciosa, they actually were born in Terceira, but with families, my dad's family is from Graciosa. So about half of the Azores combined in the genes here. So finished my degree, went back to get a master's in public administration, have continued in healthcare and medical devices for now 27 years. And in the meantime, got involved with the Portuguese Tribune, originally writing occasionally for the newspaper, that helping out when it was the old fashioned before everything was done online. And then my parents retired early, and decided they had nothing better to do than get even more involved and busier than ever by buying the Portuguese Tribune. And so by default, I've become the editor-in-chief of this family business.
And doing a fine job, indeed. And although It was your mother-in-law that was born in San Miguel, then went to Terceira, Lucy's mom. So she went, of course, very young. But even if you go at an older age, it doesn't make a difference. You can be there 3 months, you're automatically at Terceira, especially if you come from San Miguel. That's a little bit of violent rivalry. That's always important to keep the two things in perspective. So our topic is Beyond the Festa, as all of you know, constructing the Azorean diaspora in the United States. How do we actually do that? We just talked about festas on all of our presentations. Most of us talked a little bit in one way or another about a festa. It's part of who we are as Azoreans. It's part of our calendar around the social and the religious festivities that are so important still in the islands today and in communities. And no one here, I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, any of you, when we go take another version of going around, no one here is advocating ending festas by any means. But what the idea here is, how do we construct a full living diaspora in the U.S.? Our community has changed. I know the East Coast is different than the West Coast. That's why we want to have both. But Dan and I have spoken many times about how there are some similarities between the East Coast and the West Coast. There are some changes in the East Coast. It's not the same community it was 30 years ago as well. And so my first question, and I would start with Miguel, since he was the last one, is basically, how do you see the community today, Miguel, with the metamorphosis that is going on? And you know both communities well. And since we're just hit and are continuing to live in a pandemic, what do you see that this pandemic has affected our community, and what can we use to turn the pandemic into a positive, if that can be done, to correct some things and to look forward to a community that will be different in 20 years than it is today, just like it's different today than it was 25 years ago. So we'll start with Miguel. Your thoughts?
Sure. So we've been building a diaspora here in the U.S. since at least the 19th century. So this is not new to us. I would actually compare where we're going through. I'll hit on the pandemic in just a moment, but in terms of the phases of the community with the significant reduction in immigration, we're not very far away from what the 1950s, what the community looked in 1950s, which is a migration to the English language, and some of those original traditions shifting. Fast forward to today, right? So just like what you're doing here with this webinar, to reach the full potential of the Portuguese community, we need to go beyond just Portuguese. And I'm a big advocate of the Portuguese language and the Portuguese culture, but the language dies first, the culture doesn't die. So I think we need to connect there. In terms of the pandemic, I think there's definitely some lessons learned in this period. People are going to expect to have direct connection to celebrations, to cultural events via the web. This thing about saying you have to be there in person, forget that. People are beyond that. And that's for people of all ages. We see that from the Sunday Mass being live streamed to all the other events, a bunch of webinars and cultural events being done online. So I think we need to look at how do we do that going forward. I think we have an opportunity to make sure that not everything can be done for free. So how do we make sure that the appropriate monetization of these events take place? Because organizations can't survive on donating their time and their talent. So they have to get something back. So I think that this is actually an exciting opportunity for the community, as the community was slowing down. A lot of organizations either closing down or really not being extremely active. And I think there's an opportunity now to relaunch the Portuguese communities in a slightly different way.
Indeed, indeed, and the online presence is a very good point. I've noted that one, and that's something that we need to discuss even further. Catherine, how do you see the community, this metamorphosis? I know that your community in New Jersey is a younger community. In other words, there's been immigration to California ceased in 1980, as Miguel mentioned, he actually came after 1980, but it wasn't the big numbers. Okay, it continued until the 1990s in New Jersey and even beyond. And so, but how do you see, as far as the Azorean aspect? And you mentioned a little bit about the Azores Social Club. How do you see the community in New Jersey, and what do you think this pandemic has brought, and how do we look forward?
So I think I grew up in a little bit of a different situation than probably everybody here, because California has a distinct Azorean presence in that it's almost Portuguese is monotonous, or rather synonymous with Azoreanness, right? Kind of like New England. And here the majority are people from the mainland. But I think that the small but very pronounced Azorean community here in the tri-state area can likely, to Miguel's point, benefit from the pandemic, in that everybody's pivoted all of their events and all of their fundraising and things of that nature to a more digital sense. So it's all GoFundMe's, Facebook Lives, Instagram. If you didn't have social media accounts, you found the younger people that were somehow involved, or at least the kids of the people that are involved, to help you to digitally connect with the community in some way. And even the older generation that maybe probably wasn't very digitally connected is now, even just by force, right? Because there's just no other way to get information digitally connected. And so there's, virtual concerts and just donations for future events that will happen, for lunches and things of that nature. And well, this is the Festa de Santo Antonio, for example, or a Festa do Espírito Santo. And if you'd like to donate to our GoFundMe, we can do that as well. So it's to Miguel's point, a way of monetizing our current cultural importances, right? The things that we find important within our culture, but in a new way. It's not so much like I'm just going to write a check, or I'm going to drive by and throw an envelope of money at the club or to the Festa organization. So I think that much like most of the Portuguese organizations, which obviously Azorean organizations are Portuguese, the Azorean population here and the community has to kind of adapt along with the rest of the immigrant population.
Indeed. And so again, a better presence online, and it is amazing, like you said, how clubs that organizations that never heard of Instagram all of a sudden have an active Instagram account or Facebook, etc. Dan, Rhode Island, and Massachusetts, New England states are famous for their Azoreanness. How do you see the community today, and what are some of the challenges the pandemic has brought? And do you see it as Miguel and Catherine mentioned also, in the way that we should use this pandemic to kind of reflect and it won't be old business anymore in a lot of ways?
I certainly think it should. Just an observation. I think once the pandemic finally tapers off and the normal activities can get back, I think a true test of survival will be the bandas filarmónicas and the ranchos. Like Monique, I played in one of the Portuguese bands when I was younger, played the trumpet. But I still say this. I mean, there's no greater commitment, as far as I can see, than a teenager or a young adult, or even their parents or grandparents that might still be. But there's I don't think, a greater commitment within the community than being a member of a filarmónica or a rancho, where you're in normal times, your entire summer and every weekend is just about booked up with your commitment to the different events that your band or that your rancho is playing at. And so I think maybe having a year, or probably at the end a 2-year break, will probably have folks double down their interest, hopefully. But that'll definitely be a measure of survivability. I think going forward, when we look out 10, 20, 30 years, and these conversations probably happened and took place in the 50s, when maybe we're facing the same circumstances of slowing or non-existent immigration for the most part. But I think that just given the American way of life, and given everyone's sort of stimulation, as much as they want to contribute, as much as they want to be involved. I've said this for a long time. I think we need to do less and better. And when I say better, I don't necessarily mean to criticize, what's being done now, because I think what's being done now, has been sort of on overdrive in terms of the commitment, the connection to the roots. But when I say better, I mean, I think we need to probably focus on, fewer organizations, fewer events, but those that will bring people together and leave a mark on people, because everyone's busy. We've got 2 kids and they're doing karate and they've got their school activities, and we've got other, activities and commitments, and that's sort of everyone's story. And so as time goes on, I don't see those demands decreasing, but I think it's critically important for us to, as a community, to find a better way, and find a more efficient and effective way, to bring people together, so that it's not always the same folks that are, stepping up. It's not always the same folks. I mean, we've had many circumstance in Rhode Island where, comes time for a board of directors and there's no board to run the organization, and the same board, stays on and carries over. And so that's certainly a sign of the times. Last time I checked, we had, Rhode Island is really a city state. We're 1,060,000 people. We've got about 130,000 folks that identify themselves as Portuguese Americans, a majority of them being Azorean. But the last time I checked, between social clubs, Irmandade do Espírito Santo, Filarmônicas, ranchos, parishes, there are 90 organizations, which is a lot for a small state and a small community. And in my city in particular, the city of East Providence, we've got about 50,000 residents, 20,000 or so are Portuguese. It's amazing because we've got 9 parishes and Holy Ghost clubs. And when you go to the feasts and when you go to the events, especially the crew that's in the kitchen, it's the same people that are at every single one. And that, I think, is a story in and of itself, to say that, these folks, not only are they tired, but we've definitely got to do a better job of, doing whatever we can to not lose that opportunity to preserve for the future.
And these folks that are all working, and I know Miguel was, and everybody else was kind of nodding their head the same way, because we see this in California, and I'm sure Catherine sees it in New Jersey as well. These folks are going to get tired, they're going to retire. And is this sustainable this way? That's your take then for less, which can also be better.
Yeah, I don't know that it's sustainable, but going to Miguel's point, some of these things that we now take for granted as being for free or even, volunteered, that's going to end. We've got a thing here where we've done, a lot of the organizations will do a very nice New Year's Eve, party, for example, right at the social club. Well, I mean, after so many years, if you're in the kitchen cooking, I mean, at some point you want to spend New Year's Eve with your spouse or your grandkids or your kids, or you don't want to get stuck in the kitchen every time. So it gets to the point where you're going to have to pay for someone to be in that kitchen, whether it's a restaurant or a catering service or what have you. So those are the little things that, maybe the community sort of takes for granted. And frankly, maybe some even think that, these people that are in the kitchen for 6 and 7 years straight have an obligation to do it because that's what they're good at. Well, that's really not, the way it should be. And I think, in my opinion, is going to have to change sooner rather than later.
Indeed. Monique, a little bit of your take on this. So, and also give us the fraternal perspective, because, you have a different aspect from that, because the fraternals also are a business in the aspect that they sell financial products. So, people go into a fraternal, not necessarily only to celebrate their Azorianness or their Portuguese, but also for to buy a product, to help them financially. And so that's a little bit of different take. But give us a little bit on how you see all the different organizations, Casa dos Açores, the Holy Ghost, and everything else. Are these things sustainable 10, 15 years from now, from your perspective, looking at your generation and your kids, and I know your kids are younger, but looking at some who are around in the 15 to teenagers, what do you see? Is this sustainable?
Well, I think it is sustainable, but it just depends on how flexible we are and how willing we are to change. I see the Portuguese community like pre-pandemic, like right before the pandemic, we had this divide, especially like, in some of our fraternal organizations where we have the older generations who they're used to a certain thing where, everybody, this is just what we do. We go to the Festa, we go to convention, we go to our council meetings, we do these things because we hang out with our community and we're isolated. Like I grew up isolated from my friends at school. I couldn't go to the movies with them. I could go to the Festa. And so they sort of got lazy in a way because they didn't have to worry about trying to get the young people to come because the young people had no choice. The young people were already there. And they grew up in this 1950s, generation where you did what you did because this is what you were supposed to do. And everybody does what everybody else does. And now we have a generation where kids are taught to be creative thinkers, to be leaders, to think for themselves. And we have I'm Generation X kind of, and we have millennials who, they're not going to force their kids to go to the Festa. They allow them to go do different things and be involved in all kinds of different things. And all of a sudden our culture and our way of life is kind of put to the back. So we have this problem where it was, how do we, the older generation didn't feel like they should have to try to draw the young people in. There was their obligation to come. And then the young people are like, well, what is there for me? There's nothing. But I think that it's sustainable if I really agree with Miguel when he was saying about not just focusing on Portuguese people, but trying to open up to other people. And that was something we were trying to do in PFSA. We've been trying to do. And because to me, being Portuguese is a state of mind. It's not necessarily, just because you have Portuguese blood. My husband is not Portuguese at all, and he loves it. Like he actually likes it more than I do sometimes. He eats alcatra and caçoida and sopas, and he loves it all. And he's not one drop of Portuguese blood in him. And so if we can do that, I think that that can definitely increase our audience and increase interest and not keep people out, but sort of draw people in. And I think with the pandemic, that's kind of, one thing I've really seen is that, we do have people drifting away. Like in our fraternals, one of the, biggest concerns right now is trying to get the members to meet together because, for older generations, Zoom is not, they don't even want to know anything about it. They're just like, it is too intimidating. We've offered to go over there and go to their house and help them. They still don't want it. But then again, young people don't want to go to meetings anyway. So it's kind of like we have this archaic institution of having council meetings that's sort of existing, but that's definitely, I don't think that's sustainable at all. I think that we have to metamorphosize ourselves and figure out other ways that people can be involved, other ways that we can have people come together and do good things without necessarily having to have this like rigid meeting with rituals every single month. So that's something that's a little radical, but I think it's definitely necessary. And one thing that the pandemic has done is, as other people have mentioned, that Zoom has offered lots of opportunities, not definitely for reaching out to other people that we may not have been able to reach out to before. Like this Portuguese Immigrant Week that we just had last week. We had a ceremony at Root Park. Normally it's attended by like maybe 20, 30 people, and then we'd have a reception afterwards. And the video that we showed was viewed from all over the country, which normally would not have been a possibility had it not been for Facebook Live and for Zoom. And that's just one example of the different ways that we've been able to reach out to so many other people. And I think that, as Dan was pointing out, with kids having so many other obligations, I do think that I'm hoping that the pandemic has sort of helped some people sort of reprioritize their priorities, and maybe the kids don't need to be so, there's definitely, my kids are busy too, but I mean, they don't have to be so overwhelmed and so stretched out, and that maybe, they can maybe if they can make some room in their lives for their Portuguese culture. But we are seeing younger people, being involved like in the Festa here in Modesto, and like what you were bringing up about, paying people, that's definitely something we've adopted. And some of the Festas here in the Valley have started adopting that. And it's actually worked out really well, where it's like you pay people to wash the pots, pay people to wash the dishes or clean up after the Festa, because otherwise we're just going to lose everybody. So like, I guess so to sum it up, it is sustainable if we can change with the times and if we can adapt to the way the culture is now, instead of being angry about things changing, just saying like, okay, this changed, we've got to work with it.
Thank you, Monique. Indeed. So a professionalization of our associations is something that I'm hearing from about everybody in one way or another. Professionalization meaning that, there are some services that you can pay for. It's okay not to have to use professional services. And so building upon that, and I hear a little bit about mainstreaming and bringing in other communities and opening it up to other ethnicities. So I'll start again with Miguel, and we won't always start with Miguel. I don't want him to feel that he's being chastised here, but Miguel, and we'll start with you with this aspect. How do we mainstream? Give me, if you can, a couple of action items that you would like to see, because you've studied this, we've talked about this, we've discussed this until the end of time at the Portuguese American Hour that you kindly participate every 2 weeks. And so how do we mainstream? What are 1 or 2 or 3 things in your mind that you think are important for survival of organizations through this mainstreaming process?
We need to have diversity in what we offer as a community, right? It can't be just the same soap, can't be just the same, Queen's Parade and so forth. It has to be a very diverse offer of our culture, right? Including all of those as well. And I think the more I'll give you a specific example. Five Wounds Portuguese National Church in San Jose. If you went during a daily mass, 9 a.m. mass on a weekday there, before pandemic, if you had 20 people on attendance, that would be a good day, okay? Because obviously people have other things to do. With live stream, the church is hitting about 1,500 views for that daily mass. That's not even a Sunday mass, that's just a daily mass. So, and it's people all over the world. It's not, and by the way, it's bilingual Portuguese mass that attracts people that have nothing to do with being Portuguese. Right? So there's a connection to something there that people have found. And I think that's the connection that a lot of people go to the Greek festival, the Italian festival, and so forth, and they have nothing to do with those cultures. Why? Because there's something that calls them to, it's an exciting festival, there's good music, good food, etc. So I think that's one of the things that I think the Dia de Portugal Festival has been able to do, is to attract, first of all, Portuguese American generations that have been detached from the Portuguese community, but also people that have nothing to do with the Portuguese community. So I think, again, using technology, using the availability of our culture to people that are not in those specific towns, I think really will bring us to that next level. Portuguese needs to be more mainstream, right? It's, I can't, I was in high school here in the San Francisco Bay Area. And when I said I was Portuguese, and people were like, where's that? Where's Portugal? And this was not too many years ago. And so we're the most, we're the biggest community that nobody knows about. I think sometimes we feel like that, and especially here in California. So I think spreading the news, I think smaller towns have an advantage because they're more diverse. Everybody knows their neighbor might be Portuguese, come to the Festa, whatever. But I think it goes back to, again, the diversity of the offering, because, coming here as a teenager, I could care less about the Holy Ghost celebrations. I only started going much later in life. So I think, again, we need to look at the different generational needs within the Portuguese community and outside, and make sure that we publicize all types of offerings there. And let's pay for it. To what everybody has said, the whole thing about we need to donate because we got to have $100,000 in the bank because we'll die if we don't have $100,000 in the bank. What for? We need to make sure that we get that message out. That, first of all, we're proud Portuguese Americans, proud Azorean Americans, and then we have more than just a couple of 2 or 3 things that people think about of being Azorean.
Good point. And I love the idea connecting with other communities. The example of the Five Wounds Mass. Obviously, there it's somebody who understands some Portuguese or some English and who has a connection with the Portuguese community, and they can be so, you can connect with others. We can connect with others, whether they be, it's important because we're not that many. We may be a few, but we're not that many. So connect with other communities who don't have the luxury of the Portuguese hall or the Portuguese, whether they be in Texas or Idaho, that they do have the hall, but Washington State, Oregon, in certain provinces of Canada. And Catherine, it's a perfect leadway to you because and we can use Palcus as an example. So Palcus doesn't have a hall. Palcus doesn't have a Festa Queen. Palcus, for transparency, I should say that there are three of us here that are on the board of Palcus. So we're a little bit Palcus biased, but and members, of course, I think all of us are. But anyway, what Palcus has done this exactly that Miguel is saying, connecting with other communities. How important is it for Azorean organizations, those, from Holy Ghost to soccer to everything else? How important is for these organizations to think outside the box and to do something that Palcus has been doing for years, which is utilizing the new technologies to connect? How important is that to connect Azoreanists all over the U.S. and beyond?
Well, I think it's super important, and I think that, for example, Palcus has had to pivot their entire programming to a more virtual setting, from our national conference to we've done way more webinars, podcasts, etc. And to Miguel's point, it's not just about Caçoela and Bifana and processions and coronations and things like that. We have now established a Meet the Artist, for example, a series of webinars where we introduce Portuguese artists. So that's one way to connect with other communities because, okay, so you may not understand one word of Portuguese, but if you like watercolors or acrylics or sculptures, for example, you will want to see these up and coming artists that are displaying their work within our programs. Things like scholarship programs, webinars about even just medical issues that have to do with the Portuguese community. If you're interested in science, that's another way to connect to other communities that may be interested in possibly, for example, medical issues that affect their community specifically, and maybe they want to do some research based on the people that we've connected with and the context that we can provide and things like that. So it's not just about the food, it's not just about the ranchos, it's not just about the Filarmónicas. For as much value and richness as they bring to our community, we need to think outside the box in that sense, not only from a digital sense and reaching people that, in a way that's not just the newspaper or the local Portuguese television station 1 hour a week or 5 hours a week, but we also have to think about different content that may bring other people into our realm and not only have them learn about our world, but then also have them be like, well, look, maybe we can help you with this or that. So.
Indeed, and building upon that, the connectivity, the incorporating others, the going beyond outside the box, and looking at other aspects of arts. Dan, do you feel that the older generation, and let's face it, they're still in charge in a lot of our community organizations, and I can include myself in that because I'm 62 years old, but I've never been in charge of anything. And so the idea that the older or my question is, it can be uma pergunta bicuda, as we say in Portuguese, but I don't want you to take it as that. Is the older generation ready to give up to have the new generation take realm of some of our traditional organizations that can move beyond that tradition and not, of course, put away the tradition, but be more innovative with the tradition?
I think they're getting there. And I think, so when I look at the generation of my parents, so my mom will be 70, my dad will be 72. They were never, involved in the clubs, but they were very, very active in our parish, for example, right? And so when you look at a lot of these organizations, and you look at a lot of the clubs, for example, a lot of these, a lot of that generation, was very, very active. while they were still working, right? Now that they're retired, they actually have more time to dedicate to the organizations, which maybe, makes it a challenge. But I also think, at least I can speak specifically for the organization that I'm, familiar with in my area. I do think they recognize that, hey, I don't want to say that the writing is on the wall, but they do recognize that, they look around and they see that it's always the same people, and they're getting tired, and they're, I think, becoming more and more aware and concerned about, it really comes down to, and I've always said this even in politics, and I'm not a military person, but, I think for this whole topic, it's about winning the war and not the battle. And I think, as Miguel said, with respect to the language in particular, a lot of times I think it's natural and it's normal, particularly for those Portuguese Americans and even immigrants who still speak the language in sort of majority of their interactions. That seems to always be the first priority. Well, we need to preserve the language. And, to me, that seems, it's important, but it seems to be about, winning the battle, but you're going to lose the war, because at the end of the day, it's not easy to learn the language from scratch, particularly when you have, my generation and the younger generations that are, marrying folks from other ethnicities, or folks that might be, third and fourth generation Portuguese Americans and don't speak the language anymore. So, there's no silver bullet, I don't think, to solve this. But I'm hopeful, for a number of reasons. I mean, when you look around, you still see, a lot of interest in some of the younger, folks, which is, I think, critical and important. And I also see the flip side of it. At least here, we've seen, some of the organizations start to try to attract and try to, really ask, some younger folks to get involved. But one of the challenges that we have, and I think that becomes a concern for these younger folks that might, volunteer to go on, a board of directors, is these are still majority, very much like Palcus, right? They're volunteer organizations, they're member run, they're board run organizations, which ends up, I think, being a negative when it comes to folks that may want to get involved, but they don't want to overextend themselves and then realize that they can't commit the amount of time that might be required, which leads to the need for, us to really get around this professionalization and, eventually with fewer organizations.
Sure, indeed. And so I'm going to turn to Monique now, because Dan said that, yeah, the older generation is getting around to it because they're getting tired, some of them. So my question now to the younger generation, your generation and younger than you, Monique, and you being in folklore and festas and all that, you contact with younger people. Are they willing to take the realm? And are they willing to be different? Because if they take the realm to do the same thing that their grandparents did, we're a different community, it's not going to work. My perspective is this: it was really challenging, and the immigrants that started these organizations post Capelinhos, as Miguel and Dan mentioned, and Catherine and you as well. These Casas dos Socios is one of them. These folks, okay. It was really they were innovators in their own time, okay, because they also had to buck the old community that had been here, 100 years earlier. So they were innovators in their own time. Do you think, but what you see in the community, that young people are willing to take risks and not just continue what their parents or grandparents did, because that ain't going to work? Do you think young people are ready for it, in your perspective?
I totally think they are. I think honestly, to me, the biggest problem is the older generation doesn't want them to take those risks, because they hold on to this idea of tradition, and this is what we're supposed to do, and this is what we do. When you have young people, I see, a lot of times coming into, either the Festa or the fraternals, and they want to change things, people get really, really upset. So the older generation is ready to give up, but they're not ready to give up control in a lot of cases. They don't want to do the work anymore because they're tired and they've been doing it for the last 30 or 40 years. But at the same time, they don't want the young people to come in and change anything. And I really do see young people coming in with all kinds of ideas, but it gets shut down very quickly. And even in our organization, it's like I've been fighting an uphill battle, and I make people really nervous because I'm always suggesting all these radical ideas. There's always that sense like, oh, we can't make the older members mad or else they're all going to go away. So we have to like be really careful. And if we have change, we have to keep this the same. So it would just change very slowly to get them used to the idea so they don't get mad. So I think that's more of the obstacle than the young people willing to be innovative.
Great point, indeed. So we have both of these issues that we need to tackle with, and here's some great points for the community. We are coming up on the end, but I'm gonna ask you just a few more minutes, please. I know that Dan may have to go, but please stick around, Dan, because we need you. And this is going to be the last question. This is going to be, let me preface again. I'm going to ask you one question and then the last question, but I'm going to ask the last question first and we'll come back to it because I want you to think about it. If you were the president of the government of the Azores, okay? If you were the president of the government of the Azores, what two things would you institute to further the relationship between the diaspora and the archipelago? And go big. If you had unlimited resources, that you would feel the ideal project to promote Azoreanness in the U.S. Go big with the limited amount because remember that we are a region of 250,000 people. But that's going to be my last question. I just want you to think about that. But before we get to that, and I'm not going to start with Miguel so he doesn't feel he's picked on, I'm going to start with Catherine. Catherine, before we get to that question, just put that one in the back of your mind. I'll ask again. Do you think that Azoreans, and your folks are, as you said, they were immigrants. Do you think that Azoreans, and I want to, go into the Azores a little bit more. Do you think that the Azoreans in America feel that Azoreans in the Azores understand us? Is there a lack of communication from here to there, from there to here? Is there, do they think that when we go back, we just want a Sagres at the local bullfight? That's a Terceira thing. Okay, I know it doesn't happen in San Miguel, but a Sagres at the local club, and we just want to have a good time, and we want to, go whatever. My question to you is, do you feel, and you have a lot of contact with the Azores and with your family, so do you feel that Azoreans understand us? And the communities and what we are all about, this diaspora in the United States, or is there still some kind of taboos in your thought?
I think it's a little bit twofold, at least in my personal experience. I feel like they appreciate when we go back and we are not stereotypically American and quote unquote embarrassing, right? We can still speak the language. We still appreciate all the food. We're not looking for McDonald's or Burger King or Pizza Hut or whatever. And that's great. I do think that when they see things here, they might think it's strange. And sometimes it may even be, they may even think disparagingly about the way that we handle, for example, our festas do Divino Espírito Santo in comparison to how they handle their festas over there. I don't think that, despite the decades of sacrifice that immigrants have gone through here, that people in the Azores, or that the Azoreans there understand the mindset of immigrants, because they've never left. And so in their heads, it's like, oh, you just want flashy clothes and fried food and all this stuff, and so we go there and it's like, yeah, well, yeah, we'll pay for lobster and fish, and then that's their mindset. That's what they think that we think. So I don't think they quite understand that, anybody that left there left because they weren't, not that they were starving, but they weren't, swimming in money, right? You don't really leave the home, the only home that you know, unless you want a better life for yourself. And so the possibility of buying a better life for yourself or having better things is something that people want to take advantage of when they go back on vacation. And I think that that's something that is still somehow almost insulting or almost like egregious to them, right? They see people throwing around money in cafes and restaurants, and they're like, well, it's the Americans, they have dollars and money, right? So I don't think they quite understand the Azoreanness here, because it does shift. There is a shift.
So there are still some stereotypes. And you're
absolutely. And they don't get that we have to shift because we have to be Azorean enough for them when we go back, but American enough for American people here, right? So, and I don't think that they understand that.
Good point. Good point. Dan, your thoughts, and of course, you went back and fell in love with literally in San Miguel, not just with the island, but with your wonderful wife. So, tell me a little bit. Do Azorians understand Azorean Americans?
I would agree with Catherine. I think the ones that probably have the best understanding of it are those that have very close family members or very close friends who are in the U.S. and are completely and fully integrated and sort of have, one foot in America and one foot, in the Azores. I think that, much like for, a Portuguese or an Azorean American to fully understand what it's like, for an Azorean in their, sort of, day-to-day life. I didn't really get a full appreciation for it. Yes, I went to the Azores a few times as a teenager with my parents, and a few times when I first, got elected. But I really didn't get a full appreciation for the way of life, if you want to call it that, until I started, dating my wife and traveling there very, very frequently. And so, I think there's this sort of this, particularly for the younger generation. I'm 43, so I can say, for my generation, I think there's a lack of understanding of why people left. My father immigrated when he was 16. He got his first pair of shoes 2 weeks before he immigrated to America. So just to put things in perspective, right? Much like, my generation and our generation here that may not understand and fully appreciate what, our parents and grandparents and the conditions that they had to go through when they came in the 50s and 60s and 70s, right? So, that's why I think, history and learning as much as we can, is so important. But, I think that there's particularly maybe for some of the old, like my parents' generation of people that live in the Azores, I think they still might have this idea that, America is still, work, home, work, church on Sundays, a Portuguese event on the weekend, and sort of that's it. But until they're actually able to come here and spend time here, particularly for the, the younger generation. So my wife's family, for example, her nieces and nephews, they're all in college or recent graduates. They've, been here. They've traveled to, study abroad in Italy, and one of them's in Amsterdam now. So I think, they've and have been here, so they have an appreciation, I think, and a better understanding for, how fully integrated, the Azorean Americans are in America. But I think by and large, particularly those older generations, I completely agree with Catherine.
Thank you, Dan. And Monique, so from your contacts with the Azores, from the times you've gone there, and from the people that come to visit that you've seen, are there stereotypes? Do they understand what an Azorean American is all about? That he or she cannot be totally Azorean. He or she, in order to be an Azorean American, better have some Americanness, whatever that means as well.
Yeah, I definitely think that it goes both ways. I just had a conversation with a young lady the other day at the Festa, and she was saying that, she was born here in the United States, and her husband was born in Saint George, and he refuses to come to the Festa. And she's like, he totally supports what I do, but he refuses to be involved because he thinks that the Festas here are too secular. Over there it's all supposed to be about religion, and here they have the capes and the queens and and he doesn't agree with it. And kind of what made me think about it, and it's like they don't understand that there it's about religion, but here it's about religion, but also about developing our culture and teaching our children our culture and passing that on. And they don't have to do that there because that is their culture. And here we have this like larger American culture that we fight against in order to help teach our kids kind of what we went through, or what we grew up with. And then of course you hear the horror stories about, people who, like I knew a lady in St. George who had a house in Valence, and her cousin went and built a shack on her land so that she could take her land, and she had to pay 2,500 euros to knock it down. So then they think, oh, they're all rich and they don't need this here, so we'll just take it for us. And, we're the Mushkers de Verão and everything like that. But I think we also, it also goes the other way too. I mean, when our family came here, like now my family came because of Salazar. My uncle was about to turn 14, and my grandparents didn't want him to go fight in Angola, so they left, because if he had been over 14, he wouldn't have been allowed to leave the country. But when they came here, like my mom grew up in the 50s, she grew up in places with the outhouse, and they didn't have running water, and they didn't have electricity, and so they came over here, and then they just stayed the same. Like everybody stayed old fashioned. I didn't even know the Portuguese word for microwave until I went to Portugal by myself in the early 2000s. So it's like they just came and they stayed the same. And then they interact with people who live in the Azores now, and it's like people from a different country. It's like then it's not even the Azores anymore to them. Like these people are so different. They have different morals. They have different ideas. They're not as religious. They're not as, it's not the 1950s in the Azores anymore. And so it's kind of a shock for them too. So I think there's a lot of misunderstanding that goes on both sides.
Thank you. And Miguel, so, and the newspaper has a role in this. Do you feel that, first of all, I don't feel enough Azorians in the Azores read the Tribuna Portuguesa, and they should. But I'm serious. I think the press has a role in this. I think that there has to be more collaborative work, because that is one way for Azorians to know about Azorean Americans is, of course, through the press, what they hear on radio, see on television, and read in newspapers. What are your feelings about this?
I go back to what Dan was saying about professionalism. We still don't have, for most parts, a professional media in the Portuguese American community. I'm not saying that there aren't professionals in the media. I'm saying overall, it's because people feel, just like my parents, that they wanted to contribute back to the community. So I think we've done a better job over the last several years in communication both ways, right? So it wasn't just, data dumping from the Azores for Portugal to the US and not back. That's one of the reasons why the Portuguese Tribune really changed its model. Right? It used to be just like any other Portuguese newspaper in the US, which was news of Portugal, of the Azores, Madeira, and so forth, to the local community. And we shifted that model many years ago, which is now becoming the mirror of our communities back there and throughout the US. So I think that there needs to be more of that, right? More interest, because back to what Catherine was saying about stereotypes. There are some perceptions, and I lived through that. So in college, I would take 6 weeks or at a time, and each summer, and go back to the Azores. I didn't have an accent, so and so people couldn't tell. So people were telling me, friends and other people I met were telling me, well, he or she is so and so, and again, back to those stereotypes. Don't know the language, don't catch up. Things are kind of backwards, The one thing that I think sometimes we need to remind the folks who came post the Capuinhos volcano, there were, to your point, Denise, there were innovators, right? They had to break down the stereotypes of those who'd been here, even born here. The community was stale in the 1950s. And they revived the community in the 60s through the 80s, right? You look around, a lot of our organizations who are more active nowadays came from that generation. But it's time to move on, right? We also need to portray back in the Azores what it means to be an Azorean American, which is not just being a queen. Nothing wrong with that. But again, it's not that stereotype. There's a bunch of us in the sciences. There's a bunch of us in the arts. So it's not just about, again, those stereotypes. And I think, incentivizing people to come here and to go there, to really know what the Azores are like. I mean, sometimes our older generation goes back after 20 years and doesn't recognize the islands. as Monique was saying, they don't recognize because things have evolved. And sometimes here, their life hasn't evolved at all. They might live in the same little house, the same little street where they bought their first home when they came here. So I think definitely breaking down those stereotypes. And to your point, the media has, to play a role here in getting both ways, right?
Indeed, indeed. And before we go to the last question, again, thanks to all of you who are joining us, and thanks for all of you who are putting some comments. I'm getting them in multiple ways, also from Facebook, and there's a comment from Eduardo Eusebio. What will the central government of Portugal do to support the Azorean American? We're gonna go directly to the Azores instead of I think there's also a role for obviously the central government. And as Eduardo Eusebio says, after all, a good Azorean American is a great Portuguese American, indeed, and I think Ed is an honorary Azorean, whether he likes it or not. And also a great comment also from Sam Pereira through social media. Thank you, Sam, for your comments. Thanks all of you. And there's a wonderful comment from Vancouver, where the person talks about how there was actually there's a link there for those interested. Portugal and Vancouver, which was created almost 7 years ago as a platform to provide a digital resource for local Portuguese community, which is great to learn about the Portuguese and the obstacles, and that is all very, very good. I think that's Gloria also just reach out to Miguel, and Miguel to Gloria. That's the way to do it, because we need more of those examples. That's a great thing, and we're actually PBBI is going to learn about that as well. And thanks to Senator Michael Rodriguez from Massachusetts, our good friend who is following us on social media. Thank you so much, and for taking the time. He's a very, very busy guy. Thank you, Senator Michael Rodriguez from the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. And so my last question: if you were the president of the government of the Azores, and what two things would you institute to further the relations between the diaspora and the archipelago? Before I say that, I think all of you touched upon this. And the other day, just someone mentioned to me that sometimes the Azores today, and all of you touched on this, are not the same that they were 20 years ago, just like the community is not. And they said, we have the arts, and all of you mentioned that, the music and the arts, and we have, museums in all the islands, and we have this wonderful creative musical scene. Some of the names that actually our friend Scott, the poet Scott Edward Anderson, shared with us. He talked about Cristóvão, Sara Cruz, Romeu Bairros, Felix the First, João Felix from Mangra, and all of these great up-and-coming musicians. The issue sometimes is when Azoreans go there, what do we get? A lot of times, the Baudelaire, the Rancho, the whatever, and so and they stay around the same freguesia, or the same village, the same area, and so when they come back a week or 2 weeks later, that's what they see. So I also to me, the Azoreans have a responsibility on this. Maybe they're showcasing the wrong thing. If they want us to see it, showcase that. Showcase the museum. When someone reaches the Azores, when Sata gets there, whenever it gets there, when Sata gets there, or other company, why not have a group of volunteers or someone you pay to have a roteiro dos museus, so people can see where the museums are and these festivals. So I think there's a big responsibility there, and maybe that's one of your questions, one of your suggestions as well. So if you were the president of the government of the Azores, what two things would you institute to further the relations between the diaspora and the archipelago? And so what would you see as tipping points or important points to start right now? And I'll start with Catherine this time.
So I feel like if I was the president of the Azores, my first move would be to create a synergy between the diaspora and the Bureau of Tourism. To your point, yes, it's not just, and some people do go there just for the Festa, for their freguesia, right? Because that's what they want to go see. They want to go see their something, their Festa, right? Which is awesome. But there should also be a genuine effort on the part of the Bureau of Tourism and the regional government to promote other things within the island. Speaking as somebody from the tri-state area on the East Coast, I was super disappointed, for example, that the direct flight from JFK to Ponta Delgada only lasted 2 summers. And honestly, the one time I took it, it was to go to the Festa de Santo Cristo, and literally 90% of the plane was American people. Like 95 to 100 people on that plane were going for a wedding. It was random 100 people that were American that were going there because it just so happened the bride and groom had met in the Azores. Neither one of them was from the Azores. They had just met there on vacation. And they were so excited that there was a 4-hour flight to get to Europe, right? Which we don't think of it sometimes as Europe, right? Because it's our home, right? And they were so excited that in 4 hours they can get from New York to Europe, and it was cheap and everything was great and the food was amazing. And they wanted like tips, like where can I go? Where are the museums? What can I go see? And I feel like the Bureau of Tourism doesn't do enough to promote, other than like, okay, they show some pretty pictures of like the Lagoas and the Furnas and even, you know, Biscoitos and Terceira, or even like Vulcão dos Capelinhos and Faial, right? They show like the main pictures, right, that everybody always sees. But there's not like, well, if you buy a flight on Delta, for example, if we have a direct flight, then you can get, you know, a €5 ticket to go see 3 or 4 museums in São Miguel, or 2 museums. Or if you buy a flight on Delta, you can get a 50% off flight on SATA to go see 3 other islands, right? To me, it doesn't make any sense that they would have something so great. And the one obligation on the part of the government of the Azores was to promote the Azores in the United States. And because they didn't hold up their end of the bargain, this direct flight that was 4 hours, people were coming from Rhode Island to take that flight because SATA, with all due respect, was such a disaster from Boston. When we flew out, most of the Azorean people that were flying to San Miguel from JFK were from like Rhode Island, which, I mean, it was probably like 2 hours to get to JFK versus 1 hour to get to Boston, and they would rather fly out of JFK because they were like, well, I don't want to deal with SATA, right? So I think my first move as president of the Azores would be to promote the region in a way that not only Azorean Americans understand, because I feel like that made it so much easier. And Azorean Americans, at least in this area, in the tri-state area, were so excited that they had such easy access for 2 years. But also to the non-diaspora, because when everybody else starts talking about it, we feel a sense of pride. We were all like, oh, you want to go to the Azores? That's awesome. Guess what? I'm from the Azores. It's these tiny little islands. Nobody's ever heard of them. They're part of Portugal, by the way. But you want to go? I'll tell you all about it. I had people asking for all kinds of things, restaurant suggestions, hotel suggestions, in the 2 years that we had access. And I feel like the government really, really dropped the ball with something so easy, because I mean, it's not every day that you get a multinational airline to want to fly to such a small place. So
indeed, and tourism, I think, is important, and of course the Delta issue was something that the government invested dearly, but I don't think Delta wanted to continue. But I do believe
the
that
investment was great, but I think the effort was lacking on the part of the government. So they may have invested, and that's great, and they may have been subsidized by even the central government from Lisbon or whatever. I do think that they kind of just thought it was going to happen. So that's, I mean, that's just
the second year.
opinion.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Indeed. But your point as well is very well taken, and especially in the tourism as well. I mean, I think we're continue to preach to the choir, which is, you know, we have brochures at the Casas dos Açores, with all due respect, because I love Casas dos Açores, but you know, those people don't need to be told about the Azores. So, you know, we need to go beyond. But anyway, thank you. That's a very good point. So tourism, and I jotted down 2 of your great ideas. Dan, Mr. President of the Government of the Azores, Dan Dupont, what would you do to institute what would you institute to further the relationship between the diaspora and the archipelago? What 2 things do you feel are important for the Azores to do, and now?
Well, there are 2. The first thing that I would do is I would create a program for, you know, junior, senior high schoolers, or, you know, even college age of second and third generation young Portuguese Americans that would be willing to go and spend, you know, 4 to 6 weeks in the Azores and really get a full understanding of what it's like to live there. As you said, Denise, I think, you know, it's tough to really understand and encapsulate, you know, what you really need to take in a week or two. I mean, it's just not possible, particularly if you're only, going at a time where it's, festas or some other occurrences. I think you really need to spend some time there to really get a taste and an understanding of what the sort of way of life is, and also an opportunity to visit, a few of the other islands. I mean, I'm an example, right? My father's from San Miguel, my mother's from Santa Maria. There are, particularly with folks that might have come here younger that end up, having roots in different islands in different parts of the Azores. So I think, that can only, a full taste of that can only be accomplished by, giving a decent amount of time, whether it's, 4 or 6 weeks. I don't know what the right number is, but that's the first thing that I would invest. Try to get, 50 or 100 of these, young Portuguese Americans each summer in particular, to go there to get a full understanding and fully connect with their roots. The second thing that I would do is I would make a serious and concerted effort to really focus on a sustainable, second home market, and give folks that have, second homes in the Azores some economic incentive, so to speak, and it would really be by way of the cost of flights. Give them some, incentive to, make the Azores a place where they could have a second home. And it's even, I think, more of an opportunity now where, I don't think we're going to go to this permanent work from home. Everyone's going to work from home, but the flexibility that the pandemic is offering, with, all of these investments and all of these very rapid advancements in technology, which allow people to, frankly, work from anywhere. I think it also presents an incredible opportunity for the Azores, to get folks that have a natural connection there, have a natural, roots and an affiliation, or even not, but, to give them some incentive to be able to have a second home there and go and spend not only, good chunks of time, but these are folks that are going to go there and are going to, support the local economy, and not just sort of, be there, in transit and, as I like to call it, the one and done. Folks that come in, tourists, they come in, and and that's been one of the challenges, frankly, which I think makes a concept or an idea of a targeted second home approach is, before the pandemic. I mean, 2 summers ago we were in San Miguel, and even for the locals, I mean, if you were a local, even with tourism in the summer, you didn't have to make a reservation at a restaurant. You didn't have to fight for a parking spot in Furnish, for example. That all changed with the massive influx of tourists, and most of the, a lot of Americans, obviously, when there were flights from JFK and SATA flying every day, and TOP that had flights, and but a lot of those low cost flights from Portugal, but from the mainland. But I think there's really an opportunity, but they have to be they have to be committed to it. And just in closing, which I think sort of goes to this, and I thought of this point when I was reading in the comments here. I think the one lesson that I've learned in the 22 years that I've been involved in or in elective office, and now still sort of connected as a private citizen, is that we should not be under any illusions, or we should not be dependent on either the Azorean government or the main government to sort of do any of these things. I think if we want to preserve the culture, if we want to preserve the heritage, I think it really is incumbent upon us to do it. I mean, at the end of the day, the Azores and Portugal, they are Europeans. They look to Europe in terms of any number of things before they look anywhere else. And it's not to say that it's not the U.S. or not Canada, but they are Europeans. They're part of the European Union. They benefit greatly from European subsidy programs. I mean, it's a fact of life, and it is what it is. So I think we shouldn't be under any illusion that we can be overly reliant on Portugal or the Azores to sort of make any of this happen for us. I mean, your question about being president of the Azores and having the unlimited resources, I mean, that would be if I were king for a day, and which I think the things that were mentioned here make perfect sense. But at the end of the day, they have to want to do it.
Indeed. but we want to tell them that's part of the reason. And Rui Faria from the Associação dos Imigrantes, we had talked about some of the questions that we're going to post throughout the week, because we want to have some hard facts of how we in the communities and leaders in the communities such as yourselves feel, and give some suggestions. So, Monique, you are president of the government of the Azores, and the Azores has no problem having a woman president. We seem to be getting over that too, as well, in the United States. We haven't had one in the Azores yet, but we've had a prime minister in Portugal. So, president of the government of the Azores, and of course, not so unlimited as Dan said, because it's an archipelago with 245,000 people. But what are two things that you'd like to see that you feel be helpful to the community?
Well, number one, I agree with Catherine on the promotion of the tourism, but I think before we can promote the tourism, we have to make it easier for tourists to get around the Azores. It's so difficult to travel between the islands, and the infrastructure just for the tourism itself is like, if you're not in Angra or something like that, it's so difficult. Just to share a short story, we went in 2017, it was my husband and the kids and I, and we were flying out of San Miguel. So we left Fayal and we flew to San Miguel and spent the night there. We found this, I think it was Vila São Vicente or something. It was right outside of Ponta Delgado. It was this beautiful, right on the ocean. And it was a little cheaper than Ponta Delgado. So we stayed there. We had a really nice hotel. I mean, it was like a little studio apartment and everything. And then to find food, if you didn't have a car, we had a heck of a time. We left the kids in the hotel. We wandered all over. We found a pizza place, and then they didn't take credit cards. Then we finally found another place. We probably walked for hours looking for an ATM or for something. And it was just, the idea that they didn't have like a little cafe that was closer to where there's all these hotels and nothing to eat, or no taxi stand or any way for people to rent a car or rent a bike or something to get around. So I think, that's really important to encourage tourism and to encourage people to go there more often, for not just for the Festa or to hang out with your family, but to also want to explore the other islands as well. I think the other important thing too would be to develop a program of encouraging more research on the history of the Azores. As a Portuguese historian, it is not something that's very concentrated on. And I think, part of our problem as Portuguese people, I think we don't, as a culture, we don't seem to be very concentrating on promoting ourselves. So even like mainland Portugal, like the continental Portuguese history, the joke in our department was, if something was done, that means there's one book written about it. And if something's overdone, there's two books written about it. So, Portuguese history itself is already behind, but the history of the Azores is even more so. And I think that if we want, our Americans here, Portuguese Americans, to understand where they come from, we have first generation people here, and even people who were born in the Azores that probably don't know much about the history of the Azores itself. Or, I dance in a folklore group, and we've had, kids that, younger people that dance in our group. They don't understand why we dance Bailes de Roda. They don't understand the Chimarrita. They don't understand any of that. We're an ethnographic group, so we don't wear the same costumes. We try to wear traditional costumes from the 19th century. But nobody understands why we do what we do, because we don't have any information. So I think that would be really important to kind of help develop those connections and ties. And I think too that, if we had some kind of foreign exchange program between not only sending Portuguese Americans over there, and I think it would be great, not just the summer, but also if they could spend a semester there. I think that's where you really learn about life in places, but also to send Azoreans over here to live with Portuguese Americans and spend a semester going to school here. I think that would just really, it would really kind of strengthen the bonds between people, and really get to see kind of how the other side lives, and to kind of develop more of an understanding of each other.
Yeah, indeed, it would be great to have more exchange programs between the various sister city programs, because that's something that the sister cities can certainly do. Miguel, you've gone first. You're going last this time, so a lot of ideas have been taken, but I know that you had at least 5 or 6. So, as president of the government of the Azores, that you would like to put forth.
So I would say, first of all, there's way too much bureaucracy in the Azores for such a small place. So I would say, first of all, lead by example. Eliminate half of the government officials. There's no reason to have such a large government in such a small place. The population of the Azores is a fourth of the size of the population of San Jose, California. So that would really, I think, create an incentive for people to create jobs, for the private sector to take more of the initiative. There's too much reliance on the government to do everything. And when you have such a large government, it's very easy to just let the government do, let the government fund. I think from our perspective here is we need to stop relying on funding for events and organizations from Portugal. People are paying taxes there for money to be sent here. We need to invest in our own organizations. If money was no, if there was unlimited resources, I would say I would take all 246,000 Azoreans outside of the archipelago for a year. I think they would get a completely different perspective on how great a place it is, right? And what great opportunities, and the few people who take advantage of those opportunities, who create small companies, and you talk about all the trails now that are available in all the islands, and really exciting new stuff. Well, sometimes they get discouraged because, again, going back to the bureaucracy and going back to the way that people think. So I think there needs to be a shift in mindset in the Azores, as well as there needs to be a shift in mindset here in the communities.
Indeed. So new paradigms for both is what we have to explore. So we're coming upon the end. Thank you all so much. We have a comment from Rui Faria that I really like. He talks about something that now, Monique, when you go, you won't have a problem because they have Uber Eats. So you can get it delivered. But that's interesting. I don't know how many Azoreans in America know that service is now available, for example, in San Miguel or other islands. And so there is that lack of communication that must be on an ongoing basis, because nothing is static. The archipelago is not static. So things are evolving on a daily basis, and that lack of information is needed. So when Monique goes there, she doesn't have to, walk for miles and miles. She knows already about it. I mean, Uber Eats can be there, but if you don't know about it, and I think these are the services that we need to know more and more, and there needs to be a little bit more an exchange program. And there, obviously, the government can provide, because it's not at a great expense. It's not as large as taking every one of the citizens 245,000. That's a mega project, but certainly it could be. I've suggested to the prior government of the Azores one time that they, in a kidding way but not so kidding, that they should take all of the residents, because there's only 402, from Corfu and give them a week in America. I mean, that would be on CNN and every other international news. An island closes down for a week, and so and that would get the Azores a lot of attention worldwide. But so thank you all. There's been some great ideas. I have lots of notes, about 2.5 pages, and we have this recorded as well. Thank you, Miguel. Thank you, Catherine. Thank you, Monique. Thank you, Dan. Thanks to all of you for joining us. Tomorrow, just a little bit of a plug, if I may. So tomorrow we have another outstanding panel. We actually have 3 events tomorrow at noon. It's called From the Azores to California, and it's in Portuguese, Dos Açores à Califórnia, contando as nossas vivências. It's with editor Lidwino Borba, who in the last 12 years has published 88 books. He has edited 88 books, and many of them about Portuguese Americans in biography and other genres as well, in California, in Massachusetts, Rhode Island. And then at 1 o'clock, we have Mr. Azores himself. I think all of you will agree. That is, I should say, Mr. Terceira himself. But in this case, we'll go a little bit more beyond, which is Victor Santos from Amigos da Terceira, from Rhode Island, from Dan's corner of the world. Victor Santos is in everything that there is to be, from Carnaval to all the other events, and he will be talking about some of the popular culture and how it has suffered with the pandemic and what his vision is at 1 o'clock. And then at 5 our time here in California, Beyond Saudade, Azoreanness in second and third generation. So we're going to take this theme, and all of you are basically first generation, other than Miguel and myself. We are immigrants. The others were born here, but your parents are from there. And now we're going to talk to people who are second and third, and even I think one is fourth generation. And so we have an outstanding panel with Carol Gregory, Alexis Sarayas, who, by the way, kudos to her. She is the first Azorean American president of the University of Southern California Student Association, and Kathy Mendes Gully, Tisha Cardoza, and our very own that we all know, Angela Costa Simões. And so we'll have an outstanding panel. We hope all of you joining us. That's at 5 o'clock, Beyond Saudade, Azoreanness in second and third generations. Thank you all very, very much. I appreciate your time. If I can ever, I can't repay everything that you've given to the community or to everything that you've done also for PBBI. But if I can ever help you in any way, please let me know. Thank you all very much. I appreciate all of you and certainly admire all of you and all of your work. Thank you. Have a good night, everyone.
Good night.
Good night. Boa noite. Boa noite.